Good evening, folks. We are going to get started. As it's it's a little bit after 7, so apologize for the delay. We have feedback. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our third community forum for the Wildwood Early Childhood Center School Building Project. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Glenn Brand, and I am the proud superintendent of the Wilmington Public Schools. Not only do I have the privilege to serve as the superintendent here in the district, but also as the chair of the Wildwood School Building Committee. You good? This committee and this project, this is awkward right now. Test 1, 2. Nice. This committee and this project are vitally important to our community here in Wilmington. For this holds the potential to ultimately change our school facilities for the future and many generations of future Wilmington students, families, and staff. These forums, the third of which we're here for tonight, are designed specifically to provide full and complete transparency to our citizens around the developments that are taking shape with this project. I want to thank our community partner of WCTV, who again is steadfast in their efforts to try and support making these meetings accessible to the community. They are again broadcasting our forum here tonight and recording it so that community members that are not able to be here either in person or watching live can stay up to speed with this project. We are also committed to casting as far of a reach as possible, which is why we continue to support not only these in-person meetings, but also virtually via Zoom, and we are doing so again this evening for those to provide remote access, and joining us is somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, 20 or so folks, at least at this point in time. Next slide. Our agenda for this evening can be seen here, and we do indeed have a lot of information to cover. The content tonight that we will cover is highlighted here, but briefly we'll include a deeper dive into what this project is and can be, a variety of participation tools and instructions. We're committed to seeking feedback, and we've been working hard to do so. You'll hear a little bit more about that in just a moment. The Massachusetts School Building Authority, or MSBA as we refer to it, the process and the schedule that guides this project. Our existing conditions summary as we hone in on the current conditions of the 3 schools that are a target of this project, or connected rather to this project, the Wildwood, the Woburn Street, and the North. Defining project needs as we work with our team, who will introduce themselves in just a moment to you. Preliminary design options. We are at the early stages, but a critical stage of the project, as you'll learn more about. The evaluation process, as well as then how you and those that are not here perhaps this evening, but members of our community, can stay connected with this project. This is a team, and we have a lot of folks who are working here, only a few of which are here with me up front tonight, but there's a lot of other folks that we'll introduce in just a second. But I'd like to take this opportunity to pause and allow them to introduce yourself from my far right, your left. Ronnie?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ronnie Phillip. I am the project manager from Doran Whittier Architects.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jason Boone. I'm an educational facility planner with Doran Whittier Architects.
And good evening, my name is Julie Leduc, and I am the Director of Owner's Project Management Services for SMMA.
Next slide. The town of Wilmington and the school committee have partnered with the MSBA to pursue a project centered around the Wildwood Early Childhood Center. The school building committee, as it's titled, was formed and proceeded to procure the project team of SMMA, of which Julie is with, as our owner's project manager representing the town, and Doran Whittier, who is the project designer. These are professionals in the field of school construction, and we are so fortunate in our community to have them with us as part of our team, working alongside the members of the Wildwood School Building Committee. It's important to note that the selection of these 2 firms was through a rigorous process that involved joint decision-making by the then town manager, Mr. Hull, representatives from the Select Board, the Finance Committee, the School Committee, as well as school administration. As I've mentioned previously, we are really welcoming back, though, Doran Whittier to our community, as they served as the designer of this school that we sit in today, the Wilmington High School, an illustrious building that our community is so very proud of. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that I have the good fortune to serve as the chair of the Wildwood School Building Committee. While tonight is not a meeting of the committee, and rather an informational update for our community, I do want to take a moment and be sure that you and members who are watching know and have a sense of this committee. It's an important one indeed. As you can see here, we have worked hard to ensure that our committee includes representation from our many stakeholders throughout the community of Wilmington. This is, after all, a community project. And so it was important to myself and our owner project manager, Julie, to make sure that we had the interests of the town at large represented on this project committee. And we strived hard to include folks from as many groups as we could. This committee holds an important role. Ultimately, it is the decision maker around the project and the final selection that will advance forward to the citizens of Wilmington for their consideration. But it's exactly why you see here representation that includes individuals from our Wilmington Public Schools staff, town and school administration, our elected officials, select board, finance committee, and school representation, as well as members of our parent guardian community and the permanent public building committee here in town. I'm extremely proud of the collective commitment of these folks who have already spent countless hours volunteering on this project that will impact our future, our students, families, and staff. So what it is and what it can be is really this juncture of where we're at. And it's thinking big, it's thinking about what this project can be and how it can best serve the needs to support and deliver education, in this case, for elementary children in the town of Wilmington. And we're at that important stage right now. Next slide. Earlier this school year, we invited members of our community to visit recently constructed and modernized school facilities in the area at the elementary level. As we have on the eve of planning and thinking critically about what a new and/or renovated school can be, we recognize the importance of providing an opportunity for people who are interested in our town and amongst our staff and administrators to actually see up close what a modern school facility can look like. This is a little bit of a challenge if you only know the schools that are here amongst us and you haven't been in or experienced a more modern school facility as of late. As many of you know, our elementary schools are 60 and 70 years old, and boy, things have changed when it has to do with a new school facility. We don't have time to view the video tonight, but we have played this video previously, and certainly there's the QR code here linked to do that. If you've not had a chance to watch it yet, I'd highly encourage you to take a moment and take a peek. It was really well done. Ms. Kate Bissell put it together, our principal of the Wildwood, but you'll hear up close and see, for those that attended, what new schools can look like. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason, who's going to take us through the next number of slides here, and his colleague, Ronnie.
Thank you, Dr. Brand. As in with previous meetings, we're going to use the Mentimeter platform to solicit live feedback from everybody who's both here in person and participating remotely. Just as a reminder of some of the Mentimeter norms, all of your responses will be anonymous. There is an opportunity to provide comments and ask questions. For the first meeting tonight, we are going to use the Zoom platform for questions, but our intention is to leave this Mentimeter platform open for a full week after tonight's meeting is over, and then the comments and responses from the Mentimeter platform will be captured and tallying. It's also important to note that this feedback is really important to the school building committee, but it's for information purposes only. We're not going to all raise our hands and this is an official vote. Nothing we do or say tonight is binding in any way. So we just want to make clear that it's for information gathering, not for decision making. So here are the set of instructions. There's two ways to access the platform. We find that it works best on a handheld device, either a tablet or a phone. You can point your cameras at that QR code, or if that isn't working for you, you can go directly to the website menti.com and enter this code. We're going to give folks just a moment. If you could let us know that you've reached the platform by hitting the thumbs up reaction button. See that we have quite a few joining there. Terrific. As we advance the slides here up in front of the room, the graphic content should also advance automatically on your devices. As a first test of this, we did this in a previous public meeting. We'd like to know sort of which groups you're representing. Please feel free to respond to as many of these as are appropriate. Looks like we have a fairly wide representation here, but like many previous meetings, dominated by folks identifying as parents. I mentioned this just a moment ago, right? There's lots of opportunities to provide feedback in a couple of different ways. One way you'll be able to provide feedback at the bottom of your screens, the lower right-hand corner of this screen, you'll see a couple of reaction choices. So if there's information on a particular slide that you want to provide a reaction to, feel free to thumbs up, thumbs down, or heart that information. I also mentioned that we will be taking questions for those of you who are participating remotely via the Zoom platform. Feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A feature, and Dr. Brand will facilitate a discussion in response to those questions at the end of the meeting. We will convert the Mentimeter platform to enable the Q&A feature after tonight's meeting, so for those folks that are going to watch the film recording of this, you can have an opportunity to provide questions, and then we can respond to those once that week has passed. We wanted to start out by sharing some results from our last community meeting, many of which came from this particular platform. In total, we had approximately 140 participants between the night of the meeting and those who participated in the week following. This slide represents everyone who participated responses to the demographic question. Again, much like we just saw a moment ago, a wide range of constituencies, but dominated by folks identifying as parents. In one of the three grade configurations, you'll recall from previous presentations that the pre-K 5 grade configurations all include a high school size gymnasium, a gymnasium space that's essentially twice the size of what the MSBA considers a typical elementary school. And so we asked folks to respond to a prompt about whether or not that's a priority for the community and under what circumstances. And so the responses we got, the most favorable response was regardless of whether or not the existing buildings, in fact, the existing gymnasiums at Woburn Street and North remain available for community use. Since that meeting, we had also heard additional feedback that there may be value for adding a high school sized gymnasium regardless of what grade configuration it is. So we're going to revisit that discussion early in the next step to see if the pre-K 3 or the pre-KK concepts want to have a larger gymnasium, excuse me, larger gymnasium than they currently do. A key question for the entire process is about grade configuration. As everyone knows, there are 3 different grade configurations under consideration for this project. And in our last public meeting, we asked that 2 times. We asked it once before the options were presented, and then we asked it again after the options were presented to give folks a chance to re-respond once they knew how well some of these grade configurations fit on the various sites. The results were very similar. Overwhelmingly, people appear to be preferring the pre-K 5 grade configuration, but they preferred it even a little more after they saw how tight some of the sites were constrained trying to fit a project of that size on the smaller sites. With that, I think I'll turn it over to Julie.
Or Glenn.
Oh, Glenn.
So there is a very defined process with such a project as this, working in concert with the Massachusetts School of Building Authority. They have a very regimented set of deliverables and schedules, and so it's not lost upon me that at times some folks may think that we're moving awfully quickly with this at various stages, but we are aligning with the schedule that MSBA puts out for schools and communities such as ours who are in the project pipeline. And in order to stay as part of this grant program, we have to meet the timeline associated with it. So our team here is doing a great job keeping us on schedule and this project on schedule, and we are keeping pace as we move ahead into the spring, and as you'll see a little bit more about the timeline into the fall. Just want to go back, though, a little bit in time, just very quickly and briefly, to remind everyone or to bring everyone up to speed about how it is that we actually got here. We have, as you know, 6 elementary schools in the district. They're all similar vintage, 1950s and 1960s. And with that not only comes sort of aged facilities, but challenges around their space and their layout in order to best accommodate and support teaching and learning in current time periods. You hear a little bit more about the needs that these buildings have, given their age, given their vintage. from systems to electrical and many more aspects associated with the existing conditions. But part of this process is determining as a school district which is in most need. There is no question on anyone's mind, mine included, that our facilities department and their staff have worked, and I know will continue to work very hard to maintain our systems and our buildings. But the reality is they're old, and they're aging every day, every week, and that challenge becomes more and more difficult for those folks who are working hard day in, day out to maintain those systems. And that could be from everything from HVAC to roofing and everything in between. But it doesn't change the reality that the facilities are dated, and they're approaching their end of expected life. And the Massachusetts School Building Authority would be the first to convey to communities that there is a lifespan for which a school should be in operation. And I'll let the folks speak to this if there are questions on that, but it's safe to say that all of these buildings are beyond that. And so now they're being maintained, and we're looking ahead to try and renovate or build new for a school that will last for another number of generations down the road. The Wildwood Early Childhood Center was determined to be the most in need, and upon our submission to MSBA, we had to signal one school of all of the 6 that we were applying for, but it seemed clear with the respective needs of the Wildwood that that was our priority project. In terms of the enrollment and grade configurations, as we get closer to this point in time and needing as a community and with the Wildwood School Building Committee to make a decision about a preferred option, I think it's important to note that we, Wilmington, are on record with the MSBA for a certain enrollment configuration. We don't have to get into the specifics this evening about that unless there's interest, but suffice it to say that there is a certification process, if you will, that the town of Wilmington had to go through with the MSBA on the 3 various grade configurations that we're considering. And so all of the planning that is taking shape has these numbers in mind. And that makes sense even if you're not in education or doing the work that these folks do. If you have a school building that's expected to accommodate X number of students, there's going to need to be a certain number of square footage to accommodate those students in kind. The certification that we have with the MSBA, you can see here on the screen, is for 130 students at the Wildwood, but that, of note, does not include pre-K. 510 students should a new school be in the shape of a pre-K to 3 grade level span, 510 students on top of that pre-kindergarten. Mm-hmm. And in a pre-K to 5, if that were the preferred option, the planning is working around 755 students, again, plus the pre-K configuration. I'll ask Julie to share a little bit more information on this process and the requirements that MSBA sets out for communities such as ours.
The Wildwood was accepted into the MSBA program in April of 2021. The MSBA process is divided into 8 modules that you can see on your screen. Each module is a checkpoint with the MSBA before proceeding to the next phase. Overall, the process can take up to 7 years. Right now, we're currently in Module 3, which is the feasibility study. And as part of our comprehensive approach, our process timeline and stages of implementation are very strategic. The discovery process is the first phase and lays the foundation, beginning with facility reviews and educational analysis. Along the way, our ongoing working group meetings and public meetings scheduled where findings and updates are reported and the educational vision and options are refined. Starting this spring and into the summer, we will refine and analyze a short list of options towards a preferred option with continued input from the community and stakeholders. Development of the selected option will reflect the principles established in the process in the previous phases and confirm the cost impacts. So this slide here is the MSBA, where we are going. So what we will be voting on by both the MSBA and the town of Wilmington to continue forward with the desired project. So right now, as I said, we're in the feasibility stage, And coming soon, we're going to take the options that you see around the room here, and that you've seen online in previous meetings, and we're narrowing them down to a shorter list of options. By the end of the summer, we'll be able to narrow that down to one option. Behind me on the screen is where we show your project funding agreement. It is to be approved in the spring or / summer of 2025 with the MSBA, and the design is developed for construction. The project completion is estimated for 2028. Ronnie?
So in the current preliminary design phase, you'll see it as PDP. We like to use a lot of acronyms because otherwise we'd be saying a lot of words a lot. Our objectives here are to determine what size building will meet the educational needs for the grades and project that we're looking at, and develop a conceptual plan. From there, we test fit a full range of concepts on each of the available sites around town to determine the pros and cons of each. From there, we then estimate each concept based on a cost per square foot to understand the magnitude of the project cost. We will then use that information gathered to shortlist the many options that we have into a few options. MSBA requires, at minimum, that shortlist will include all 3 grade configurations that Dr. Brand just reviewed, the pre-KK, pre-K3, and pre-K5, as well as one of each type of project, which means a repair project, a renovation and addition project, and new construction. In the first phase of the feasibility study, the design team evaluated the existing school facilities and sites that are part of the project. We reviewed the 3 existing school locations, Wildwood, Woburn, and North Intermediate, and ideally we wanted to understand the potential limitations and opportunities at each of these sites. In general, the buildings are of similar vintage, but the sizes of the sites definitely vary. This became evident when we began the site design and layouts for the multiple options studied, and then were further developed. The design team visited each of the locations to assess the current conditions of the buildings and the sites. This is a snapshot of the results scored to give you an understanding of how each school compared to the others. As expected from buildings of similar vintage, scores are not that far apart. And in general, North Intermediate has had more updates over time and has scored higher than Woburn Street and Wildwood. Using this information, the design team then generated a list of repair items and a code requirements list that is referred to as the Capital Improvements Plan, intended to extend the life of the buildings for the next 50 years. This is the basis for the repair-only options, which we'll discuss later in the presentation. In summary, the facilities are well-maintained for the age that they are and continue to maintain and stay operational. However, it's inevitable that infrastructure upgrades may be limited without a major project, and that would in turn potentially trigger several codes that ideally but eventually ideally meet the educational vision in Wilmington.
In addition to the existing conditions assessments, the design team facilitated several visioning workshops. This sequence of slides we've presented before, but wanted to remind folks and share with folks who haven't participated in those meetings how extensive that process was. Through a series of 8 sessions, we invited approximately 50 participants to help shape the early phases of this project. And the outcomes of all of those sessions we've got summarized here. We won't take time to go through every one of these, but some particular highlights. Coming out of visioning session number 1, there was a recognition that there's a lot of needs across the district and an interest in knowing what the full district-wide plan is. A preference for pre-K5 grade configuration started to emerge at that time. Envisioning session number 2, where we talked about education, there was a recognition that students learn differently today than they did in the past, and therefore the facility needs to accommodate a different kind of teaching and learning practice from the existing buildings. That includes things like a much wider variety of spaces and much greater flexibility. And then finally, in that visioning session, there was a recognition that that the building needs to be able to evolve over time, allowing future educational models to be delivered without significant changes to the building. In visioning session number 3, we talked about building organization. A number of strategic relationships came out of that particular session. And overall, there was a desire for both a welcoming and a safe environment that educationally encourages students to explore both their curiosity and their independence. And then finally, in visioning number 4, we drilled down into sort of individual rooms and individual departments. And again, a number of very specific things came out of that session, like varied learning environments are necessary. There's an interest in mobile and flexible furniture, and that internal connections between spaces is an important feature, all of which have now been folded into all of our conceptual design work and are represented in even these early options that we're evaluating. In terms of square footages, Dr. Brand mentioned that each grade configuration has a size of building that's necessary to accommodate the educational intent. Again, we won't go through these numbers in great detail. Obviously, a smaller grade configuration, fewer students results in smaller sized buildings. So for pre-K, we're looking at around 67,000 square feet for those concepts. For pre-K3, we're looking at just over 117,000 square feet. And then for the pre-K5, we're looking at almost 168,000 square feet. We included the column at the very right to give you a sense of sort of how efficient each one of these are. And I'll just note that the pre-K5 would have been the most efficient of all of the different grade configurations from a square foot per student perspective had it included the elementary size gymnasium. The fact that it has a double-sized gymnasium pushed it just above the efficiency of the pre-K3 model. So we explored a wide range of options, as Ronnie mentioned. The MSBA requires us to explore all 3 grade configurations and various construction methodologies for each one. So this table represents 15 of the 18 different explorations that we pursued. Where you're seeing the NAs, the not applicables, those are sites and conditions where it didn't make any sense to explore that particular scenario, and I'll give you one example. If we look at pre-K3 under both new and ad reno, it doesn't make any sense to pursue that particular concept on the North Intermediate site because grades 4 and 5 aren't included in the project. It would result in 2 sizable schools on the same piece of property. So although those cells are in the table, that's why we didn't explore those particular options.
So as we went through each of the 18 options, we had to ask and then answer these questions. Can we accomplish the goals that we've set? Does it fit on each of the sites? And how could we do it better? So we have gone through and started to analyze each of these. Again, the 4 sites that we looked at are the Wildwood, Woburn, North, and Town Hall site. And we looked at what access they had to municipal infrastructure, what were the topography challenges that we had to consider, and how that would impact building placement. And then acreage. Can we fit 755 plus building on the Wildwood site, and what compromises would be made at that time? So then we went through a rigorous evaluation process. We have a tool called the evaluation matrix, and it was organized into the 9 categories that you see on your screen. The alternatives were scored based on the first 8: education, site, restrictions and future use, community, sustainability, construction logistics, total time to address all of the needs for the pre-K5 population, consolidation, and then the 9th category was cost. After estimating the 18 options, we realized that the cost actually didn't impact the rankings because they were within similar ranges of each other. So at the end of this phase, MSBA requires, and this is just a reminder as we're considering moving into the next part of this presentation, one alternative from each grade configuration has to move forward in the shortlist. One alternative from each renovation addition and new construction have to move forward on the shortlist. And then one repair alternative. And I wanted to clarify that the repair alternative for Wildwood would move forward, and even though it doesn't meet the educational needs of the district, it still has to move forward for comparison purposes. But Woburn Street and North Intermediate, because they don't include the pre-KK population, they are just moving forward for comparison, because when we consider a pre-K 5 option, if we just looked at North, we're ignoring Wildwood and Woburn Street and what would have to happen at those sites to make it comparable and have apples to apple comparisons with a pre-K 5 add reno or new construction project. So last summer, the design team conducted assessments of the existing buildings and sites, and we generated a list of the repair options and code requirements for estimating. That means the work proposed in the alternatives are not just cosmetic, but look to extend the infrastructure of the buildings and meet current codes as well. Individual items on the list may not trigger codes. However, several smaller projects or even one larger project within a 36-month period will trigger upgrades and are included in these alternatives for that reason. So here we have the cost of the pre-KK alternatives. The first one is the repair only, and then we have add reno and new construction costs. And I want to clarify that we've provided a range of the project cost, and when we refer to the project cost, we're talking about the construction cost plus the additional cost which will impact the project over the course, which means the management fees, design fees, contingencies, furniture, fixture, equipment, testing, insurance, all of that has been accounted for, and so the numbers that you are seeing are an all-in number. For the pre-KK alternatives, the add reno and the new construction project costs were within a similar range. It's about 78 million to about 88 million, and that's for that 67,000 square foot building. A pre-KK repair only project, although less in cost by comparison, it does not address the educational space needs to meet the district's plan. This alternative maintains the existing 29,000 square foot building that is on the site today with no reconfiguration of spaces for things like breakout and small group rooms. No work is included at Woburn Street and North Intermediate schools with any of the pre-KK options. The schools would have to be addressed as capital improvements or a repair-only project or potentially an MSBA project in the future.
So if you all remember, sorry, my Southern Indiana just kicked in right there. I apologize for that. The MSBA requires certain things on the short list of alternatives, so we're going to ask for your feedback in a couple of different ways to align with those requirements. So related to the pre-KK options, we're going to ask you to rank, in terms of your preference, the order of just the pre-KK options, and we'll do a similar set of feedback for each of the other grade configurations in a moment. But if you could just take a moment and rank these. A first place ranking means that's your most preferred. A fourth place ranking means that's your least preferred. And as you're submitting those results, you'll see the analysis engine working in the background, and it should display the results in real time on the screen behind me. So as these results start to come in, what appears to be emerging is a preference for new construction over add reno or repair. We've got 21 responses of 34 in the meeting. thank you for doing that. Pre-K 3.
So costs included on the screen now include consolidation of 2 of the 3 elementary schools, Wildwood and Woburn Street School. The projects are within a range of $130 to $150 million. And the differentiating factors include the size of the site. For example, Wildwood is a much smaller site, and therefore it would have less site work that would have to be included in the project. Whether or not a site is occupied during construction, it can definitely extend the duration of the project when it's occupied and you're working around students and portions of the building at a time. And then the amount of square footage that is considered renovation versus new construction square footage. Renovation will be slightly less as a cost per square foot, and so that's typically why you would see that an ad reno is slightly less than new construction.
So again, same feedback mechanism. This is just pre-K 3 alternatives. If you could take a moment and rank these in order of preference. It's always exciting to watch these change in real time. It's like a little bit of a race. There's a few more alternatives here, so we'll give folks a little extra time. Again, we've got about 23 responses, and it looks like a similar type of feedback here, a preference for new construction over renovation, additions, and certainly over the repair-only scenario. And it looks like the top preference being expressed is new pre-K 3 at the Woburn Street site. Okay, move on to pre-K 5.
So this is the full consolidation of all 3 elementary schools under consideration. The range of the cost is in the 200 million range. And these are the project costs, and it's meant to understand the magnitude for this size project. With each phase, we are going to continue to refine and develop the concepts, and then in turn, it will give us a more detailed, refined cost estimate. So as we progress, the range that you see, so for example, new at Town Hall, the $187 million to $207 million, that gap will start to shrink, and we will have more confirmed numbers. But right now, we're at such an early phase, and there's so much that we don't know that we have to factor in contingencies as we do this. And so right now, we have this wider range for this overall project cost. But I did want to mention that with each phase, we are continuing to refine the details of the concepts, and then in turn, when we estimate them, we'll have a clearer idea of what that number is.
And again, we've got a similar set of feedback for these pre-K 5 alternatives. And again, there's a few more in the list compared to the pre-K 3, so we'll give you a little extra time to rank those. Got about 18 responses coming in. Again, it looks like similar feedback where we've got the new construction options being preferred over addition renovation options, and then the repair only option at the bottom of the ranking. Looks like we've got most people responding. So let's move on to the next kind of feedback. As you recall, the MSBA requires us to carry at least one of each of the various construction flavors. And so rather than thinking about grade configuration, we'd like you to rank all of these new construction options in your order of preference. That might be a little harder.
And if it helps, the boards are around the room if you need a refresher on what some of the options are.
Yeah, we understand what there's a comment in the Zoom Q&A about it's difficult to evaluate these options without additional context. We're going to ask an open-ended question at the end of tonight's meeting about what other information can we provide to help you provide feedback to the school building committee and the design team. For those that are in the room, as Ronnie just mentioned, the options are around the room, but if there is specific context that could be beneficial, please let us know about that, and we'll do our best to provide that context. Okay, it looks like our responses are coming up to the low 30s. Things are still jumping around a little bit. But in terms of the new construction options, it looks like they've actually been sequenced in grade configuration order. Pre-K 5 at North is currently the highest ranking, but there's a near tie between second place at Town Hall and Woburn Street site, followed by similar results for Pre-K 5, or excuse me, Pre-K 3. That's on nearly 100% participation rate, so thank you for that. And then one more flavor of this. And we know this is difficult, but it is important feedback for the school building committee. In terms of addition renovation scenarios, are there any preferences? Perhaps some of that context that might be useful. I see that the Pre-K 5 ad reno at North is emerging at the top of the list. That happens to be a 4-story concept because of the nature of the existing building and the site. So it looks like we've got 28 responses there. Thank you for that. And then a cost-related question. So obviously we've done one round of cost estimating, and there will be lots more cost estimates. And as Dr. Brand and Julian and Ronnie have mentioned, those cost estimates will get down to a much finer level of detail. They'll be prepared with a lot more information than we are right now. But given where we are now, how strongly do you should the district consider each one of these particular items? Right, some of them are grade configuration related, some of them are construction related, and one of them is site related. Yes, and you can respond to each one of these. You don't have to pick a preferred statement. Please respond to all of them. So just a quick explanation of what's happening with the results that's showing up on the screen here. The circle with the number in it represents the average of all the responses that are coming in, but the color, the shaded area behind each statement represents the level of agreement. So for example, with the pre-KK grade configuration, because most of the light blue color is on the far end of the spectrum, that represents a high level of agreement around that, well, less than 1 average score. But if we look down at the ad reno alternatives line, the light green in the background shows a large bump in the middle. And so that represents less agreement because there's another big bump on the far left-hand side. And town hall, it appears to be a mixed bag of responses there.
Jason?
Yes.
Do we need to explain why we call out town hall site separately?
Yes, thank you for that, Christine. At the school building committee level, there were some criteria developed around where the sites were located relative to students, where they were located relative to the rest of the catchment area. And there were some concerns about the town hall site in particular. If it were the home of a school site, it would not be available for other potential future projects. There were site traffic concerns around that site that seem to be greater than other sites. And so that's why that particular site has been called out for special feedback. Thank you for that. Looks like we have nearly everybody responding to that. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Ronnie.
So, actually, I think based on the results of the Mentimeter, it is in line with the preliminary results that we received after completing the evaluation matrix. So when we went through the evaluation matrix, we had scored each of the criteria, and then those 9 categories that I shared earlier were given a score and then weighted and added together. And so what you see here is the total score. And we have included the total scores here for you to understand that these were the ones that scored the highest, and that's why they are showing up as on this slide. What we're also doing is more or less identifying the potential shortlist. So for the pre-K options, the repair only at Wildwood, as we said, would have to move forward. And then the new at Wildwood was the option of the 4 that scored the highest. For pre-K 3, the new school at Woburn was the one that scored the highest. And for pre-K 5, new at North scored the highest. We then also needed to evaluate because none of the ad renos had scored higher than new construction. So we looked to see of all of the ad reno, which scored the highest, and that was the ad renovation at North Intermediate. So that is also included on the list. So with the options that are shown on the site, we have at least one option within every grade configuration, and then we also have one of each type of construction that is required to move forward on the shortlist to MSBA. One thing I also want to note is that MSBA does provide reimbursement for a portion of the cost for the project. We don't know what that exact number will be because there are certain ineligible costs. For example, if the district were to, or the town would pursue a 12,000 square foot gymnasium, MSBA would reimburse for 6,000 square feet of that gymnasium. So the other 6,000 square feet that total cost for that portion would be for the town and ineligible for some sort of reimbursement. The same is for, give me another, CARES, potentially.
Yep.
CARES would, the CARES program, that's not something that is found as an eligible cost, and so that would also be considered as an ineligible cost if those spaces were to be in the project and move forward.
We have, maybe if we could just hold questions for just a moment. We have just a few more slides here, and there's some questions in the room already and some coming in online, so if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just one more thing I'd like to add. We also are showing the repair only at Woburn and at North Intermediate, and so those are going to move forward as for comparison only because they do not actually include the other schools that. So for the pre-K 3, the repair only at Woburn does not include the Wildwood School as shown, and so that's why it's there for comparison purposes, but it would not actually be a viable option in the eyes of the MSBA.
Yeah, if I can just add a little bit to that, Ronnie. We've added those costs in here to give a sense of what the total cost would be to address all pre-K 5 students on the north side of town, should something like the pre-K option get selected. So if you were to do an apples to apples comparison of cost, you would need to take the new pre-KK at Wildwood number, and then add to it the pre-K, the comparison only number, the repair at Woburn and the repair at North as a minimum. And if you were to execute those as MSBA projects, all of those numbers would likely be higher because of how long it takes to complete major projects. And speaking of cost, we wanted to share a little bit about the MSBA data on cost. What this graph shows is all of the MSBA projects dating back to 2020. Each mark on the graph represents the cost per square foot of the project at the time the project funding agreement was signed. So the orange line, which represents the average, goes up to the right. That represents the escalation of project costs over time. And so this timeline goes out to 2026 because there are some projects that are already in the MSBA data that will sign their project funding agreement in 2 years. And you can see that the line goes from roughly $450 a square foot up to roughly $925 a square foot. So that's just to give you a sense of where other projects in Massachusetts are falling right now in terms of their cost. And if we were to zoom into that, at this end of the spectrum, where our project is taking place, all of our concepts fall within this teal box, right? Ranging from approximately $720 a square foot to $925 a square foot. And so that's sort of right in the middle of the pack for projects that are actually a little bit ahead of us in terms of their process. And the total projects that are in this cohort range from $700 a square foot to over $1,000 a square foot. So that's meant to say that this project isn't sort of way out of bounds compared to its peers, even at this early stage.
Could you just go back just 1 second, Jason? Just an important point there on slide 53, or 52, I'm sorry, relative to cost. You'll note, for those viewing the slide there, just as a point of reference, the square footage cost of the high school, the building that we're in now, in June of 2013 was $352 per square foot. So you can see in comparison where construction costs in general have gone over the years since then. And obviously, if this school were to be built today, it would certainly not be, it would not be at $352 per square foot. So a much higher value that is inevitably pushing up the costs of all of these projects throughout the Commonwealth.
Is Vivian on?
No, I'll take this one.
No, so we are going to, we're going to open it up for questions in just a second, but before we go there, just for those that are here in person, and thank you for coming out on a rainy, miserable night. For the 27, 28 folks that are joining virtually, we thank you for giving of your time. For those that weren't, for friends and neighbors who weren't able to make it tonight, just as a reminder, not only is this meeting going to be recorded and will made widely available through WCTV's YouTube platform. We'll create the link on our website. But the feedback mechanism that you saw earlier today that Jason took us through, again, is also going to stay open for feedback from the community. I don't think you mentioned it earlier, Jason, but the last time we did a community forum, our team here used that Mentimeter platform, and there was, the responses in person were 70 for the meeting, but then following that, when the recording was available, the responses doubled, right?
Correct.
So this seems to be an effective way to try and gather feedback, and the point being here, if you have a neighbor or friend who wasn't able to make it tonight, it's not too late. We welcome the feedback. We're striving to be as open and as accessible as we can for anybody to provide feedback on this important project. We're also working hard to amass all of the reports and all of the information. It's a lot. I recognize that, for whether it be a staff member or a community member trying to tune into this project. We're not trying to overwhelm. We're just trying to make sure that all of the documentation related to this story, and it's a big story, is available and accessible for anyone. There's a tab off the district website. We had this conversation with the town when we started this project, and it was decided that this and our district website would make the most sense as a place to house all these documents. So after all of these meetings, information is uploaded and available for anyone as well, too. So,
And we've actually got two more bits of feedback for everyone. So related to methods of communication, the Public Relations Subcommittee is interested in knowing what's working and what's not working, or what could work better. So we're asking you to identify which communication strategies potentially would work best for you.
so just flash forward to next, oh, sorry, you're doing that, sorry. Sorry, yeah, I'll pause. Yeah, thanks. Getting ahead of myself.
Looks like a little bit of everything. Some of the highest percentages are hybrid meetings, direct emails, social media posts. So that's helpful. That's very helpful feedback. And then one last ask of your input. We already heard a question about context earlier this evening. But again, right, the design team, the school building committee, the district and town, right, we're all interested in providing the information that you need to be well educated on the project. And so if you could just take a moment and tell us what other information you think might be helpful as we cross over into the next step. As some of these are coming up, let's just respond to some of them. So things like impact on students during construction, obviously that varies depending on which option gets selected. And that was a criteria against which all of the options were evaluated. And in broad terms, projects that happen away from occupied buildings are less disruptive than addition renovation options where students are inside the building. The most disruptive is something like a repair option where there isn't anywhere for students to go, and maybe they have to be moved into modular classrooms, or you have to deploy what's called the missing square strategy, where you squeeze students into 3/4 of a building and renovate it one segment at a time. Those would be the most disruptive scenarios. Town's funding plan for funding the project, estimated tax impact. All good feedback, so thank you for that. Dr. Brand?
So the next Wildwood School Building Committee meeting is scheduled for April the 3rd at 6, I think it's 6 o'clock?
6:30.
Here in the large group instruction room. And at that meeting will be an evaluation of the many options to the few. Again, as you saw earlier tonight, we have a lot of options right now, and the goal and the need for this project is to narrow that down. Keeping in mind that it's at a very high level right now conceptually, but we are needing to narrow it down. Think of that as the sort of the inverted funnel or cone. And that next phase is happening, we anticipate on April 3rd at their meeting. This is the third community forum in this phase of the project. There's more phases, as you saw earlier, to come, and certainly with that will be more community outreach. We don't have a future date for that as of yet, but we will work with our leadership team on that. But there are some documents that, to finalize this phase, will be submitted to the MSBA in April. So at this point, we'll shift to questions and answers. We'll do our best to field. Those that are coming in online, and thank you. We have a few already. Anyone here, certainly in person, is welcome to ask. Ideally, if you could go to the microphone, because that will be best for folks to hear the question. Sometimes, if you're just sitting where you are, the microphones might not pick it up. And that's not for us in the room, but it's for those that are watching at home. I'll start with going to a couple of questions. We'll bounce back and forth with the first. Will this project affect all pre-K 5 students? I'm assuming that question is to mean in town. And the answer is no. This project is focused specifically on the 3 schools on the north side, the Wildwood, the Woburn, and the North. That was a byproduct of a couple of things, both our submission to the MSBA, a mindfulness of what the town's facilities master plan highlighted as a pathway of school consolidation in 2018. And so at the end, we had to designate a school, and it was thought that the inclusion of the 3 schools together, Woburn, Wildwood, and North, would make the most sense at this time. Another question online was around infrastructure. There was a lot of cost to get infrastructure to the town site. Jason or Ronnie, could you speak to that?
Sure. So we did preliminarily look at the town hall site, and if the town hall were to move forward into the next phase, we would continue to delve deeper, if you will. But there is infrastructure because of the town hall building being there, and so we are building off of that information.
And then one more, and then we'll open up if anyone has questions here. I saw that access to gas was a consideration. Is heating and cooling by heat pump technologies a priority?
So as part of this project, when we consider the incentives that MSBA offers, one of those is around sustainability and having this project lead silver at the end. And so we have a sustainability committee that, or working group, I should say, that we will be meeting and reviewing several mechanical options and also power sources and just all of the sustainability features that will be considered for this project. And we will look at them. We will do a life cycle cost analysis later on to understand the cost implications of each of the systems. And then a decision will have to be made to decide which one is the best fit for the project. But we will be considering a wide range, including heat pumps.
Thanks, Ronnie. Are there questions from folks that are here in person? And if so, please feel free to come forward.
Good evening.
Hi.
Kevin McDonald. Thank you for being here tonight. I do apologize for getting here late. I had a prior commitment, so I missed a lot of the meeting, but I did have some thoughts and some questions and some suggestions. For those of you who don't know me, my background is in the industry of construction, particularly site work. And I bring that up because one of my concerns is the financial aspect of some of the proposals, particularly where kids need playgrounds, and developing playgrounds are fairly expensive. We already have the town hall that has playgrounds. We're told that there's a new town hall getting built. So to me, to have a building that was a school, which I actually attended in elementary school, the Glen Road, which already has fields there, it seems like the most common sense way to approach this is to really take a deep dive into looking at putting these early education children into the Glen Road School. I've had conversations with one of the most successful, biggest developers in our area, and maybe one of the most successful in our country, named Bill Cummings Properties in Woburn. And he's taken some very almost ancient buildings, particularly in Beverly, the one that used to be the shoe factory, and he's turned it into beautiful, marvelous projects that are such revenue-generating projects that now he is at a wealth level where he's basically given his money away. And many of the nonprofits in Wilmington have actually benefited from that. One of my concerns is the massive tax impact on people. When this school got built, we were actually told that your taxes were only going to go up the cost of a cup of coffee a day. And people, if they're honest, you've seen your taxes double. We were told at one time that Wilmington was the best affordable community. And if you check the Registry of Deeds, particularly people that have moved out of Wilmington, it's in the hundreds and hundreds of deeds that got transferred. So one question that you might want to ask yourselves is, if Wilmington is the best affordable community, why are hundreds and hundreds of people moving out of Wilmington? I did have a question for you regarding the early education students that get moved over to the area that get developed at the middle school. And forgive me if you talked about this earlier, but could you just maybe speak and elaborate on that a little bit as to how that's working out and the sustainability of the structure and the facility to actually provide education for those students? Is it adequate now? And what's the total of the students?
Mr. McDonald, can I, just in fairness for others, I'll answer that question if I can, and then if we could just open the floor to some other questions. And
Yeah, I
then
didn't
we
want
can
to
come
take
back.
people's time, but I did think
Sure.
that
Yeah,
it had some
let me,
value.
I'll certainly respond to that question, and I thank you for it. It's a good one. Sure that many others have it in the community. I know we have some Wildwood staff here. We and the staff and the leadership are making the best of that situation in terms of operating the Wildwood over two schools, the west and the middle school space. Certainly had an impact on the middle school staff, requiring a number of them to relocate in the building, and they've been great in helping accommodate that. It's far better than it was the last year and a half or 2 years when we had the Wildwood spanning 3 different schools in town. But the staff are working hard to make those programs run, and by all accounts, our families are quite pleased with what they're able to provide students. It's still a school split over 2 locations. It's not ideal, from lack of, totally appropriate outdoor play space to the need to have very small legs cross a wide span of street there on the roadway. So we're looking at it as a short-term solution with the hope that the community will realize that it can't be a long-term solution. Hence why we're deeply focused on what one of these projects will be to allow Wildwood to come back together under one roof.
Okay. Is there a particular reason why it can't be a long-term solution?
There's lots of reasons that I would respond to that on. Certainly the fact that the space itself was not designed to support all that we're trying to provide over a couple of school locations. So.
Okay, I don't want to take any more time. I just had one comment left, and then I'll let other people speak before I ask any other questions. This school roughly cost around $85 million, and it was sized for 960 students. And now we're hearing numbers of $100 million for a new school for early education that's only going to educate 170 students. So it just doesn't seem to square. It just doesn't seem to be a financial wise move. But that's what all I have to say for now. I'll let someone else.
Thanks, Mr. McDonald. I'll just use that as one point before we get to the next question. And for the folks that are still watching, of which, in case you're interested, we have 30 still that I think, give or take, that are online. One of the things that will have to certainly be clearly sort of unpacked and made very available for anyone who's sort of watching the project as it takes shape, and ultimately asking the Wildwood School Building Committee members to make a decision on, is really to your last point in question, and that is around, so, building new construction clearly is very, very costly, but so too is repair only, and one of the things that in the coming months will have to be made pretty accessible for folks to help inform a decision is, what that really looks like in terms of just leaving our current schools sort of in the shape or configuration grade level that they are, but what it might take to repair, and that's where it gets more complicated, and I know our team will take us through what that means. You heard tonight, for example, codes. Certain codes, accessibility codes, are triggered. I'm by no means an expert on any of that, but I know that it's more than just to simplify it, sort of putting in new windows and a fresh coat of paint. There's far more to it than that. When you take a look at the repair-only options for the 3 schools that we're talking about, the rough numbers that we're looking at for total for the 3 schools is between $95 to $105 million. And so hence a whole lot of money there, obviously, and certainly would be important for the community to understand. And again, I know our team will, not tonight, but in the future, lay that out, is how much of that may or may not be supported rather by funding from MSBA, and how much of that would be entirely on the taxpayers of town. So costs are clearly important, point well taken, and certainly a lot to unpack as we go through the next phases of the project. You're next.
So just for those who may not follow this as closely as I have, all of our 6 elementary schools are similar vintage and shape. That means all of them need repairs. And I just, Mr. McDonald pointed this out, like construction costs are increasing. So if we look towards, anything other than a pre-K 5, we have to think about, exponentially higher costs for addressing kind of the same population with multiple school buildings. Am I understanding that? Would we be able to get those kind of construction projections to know, 15 years down the line when we might be able to get another school project, what we might be looking at if we don't do the pre-K through 5 and take care of half of our schools now?
We could certainly run that math through, like any kind of forecast. The further out you look, the less accurate it is. But we have done that in other communities where we try to speculate about future projects and future project costs, if that's important
the
information.
Trajectory. Cool. And then I had one other question, which was, if you could just explain a little bit why we might not want to consider taking the pre-K 5 ad reno at the Woburn Street to the next phase, because as you mentioned, like the north ad reno does have 4 levels, and that one was completely terrible in my personal point of view. So if you could just explain a little bit about that.
So no decisions have been made around that yet, right? What we shared with you was sort of a first pass at the scoring and what sort of the minimum number of options to move forward might be. There's no minimum, or no maximum number of options that can move forward. So at the next school building committee meeting, we may have exactly that discussion, right? Everybody that was in attendance at the public meeting seemed to agree to these, but maybe there are others that should also be included in that list of options that move forward into the next step.
We'll go, just if I can, to our virtual question and then in person. This question is, in a perfect world, I would like a K-5 school. I feel like a 755 student school is big, especially for younger students. Also, if anything happens to that school, it affects a lot of kids. Has there been any consideration of building a smaller K-5 school and converting one of the other schools to a K-5 school? These are all great questions. So in this current plan, that would require, folks correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be 2 projects, and we would have to change course with our current agreement with MSBA and withdraw from that, is that correct?
Correct.
Right. And start over, yes. Next question, thank you. These are great, thank you, we appreciate it.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. This has been great. Look, I'm Haley. I'm a parent. I got a 3- and a 5-year-old, so we'll be maybe impacted by maybe sneak in there. And so really appreciate the perspectives and conversation here. And I think one thing, Mr. McDonald, to respond to one of your comments, you're saying so many people leaving, we're not taking care of our schools. So I think taking care of those schools is sort of what we're doing here and why this is so valuable to spend this money and spend it now. And so you're seeing all those families, those younger families move in. So I appreciate that comment and then so grateful to have this conversation here. My biggest question, and I would love clarity on, when we talk about the shortlist that we're sending to MSBA, is what do we do with that shortlist? Because I know you're saying there's criteria like we must have a reno, we must have a new construction, we must have those options. Do they select and move forward the best options? Do we vote on those? What's that shortlist? What do we do with it?
So, do you want?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so we right now are in the feasibility study phase,
Yeah.
and there's 2 parts. We're in part 1, which is the the preliminary design. So that's very conceptual in nature. MSBA wants it to be, I guess, realistic for us to delve into each of the options with enough detail to have more information to make an informed decision to eventually get down to one
Gotcha.
option
Okay.
that would then move forward, right? And that is when you get down to one option, that is when the town and MSBA sign on the cost of the project. There's this huge document, it's very detailed, of how we will be moving forward into design and then eventually construction. So until then, we're here to do the due diligence and really understand each of the concepts. And so when we go from the many, right, we're just trying to shortlist that, the next phase, we will take that shortlist and we will continue to develop the design, continue to develop the site impacts, and then re-estimate it, because then we will have a little bit more information on each of those options. And then we'll, again, bring it back to the community and say, okay, we went from, whether it's 6 or 8 or whatever we end up with on this short list, and we now have to look at one to go into what's called schematic design. So that's when we will leave the feasibility study phase and then move into schematic design. Schematic design is when you'll start us, we'll be picking out more of the finishes and getting really into the details and re-estimating, and that's when we'll have a really clear idea of what the cost is, and we will run the analysis with MSBA and be able to understand what MSBA's contribution will be at the end of schematic design. And once we have that information is when the town will vote on whether or not to move forward with the project. So right now, we really are not voting on, when I say we, but the community is not voting on one project or one cost. We're just voting on what should move forward for further development and design, and then understanding, so that we can eventually make a preferred option move forward into a project for the community.
Okay, that's helpful. That makes total sense too. So it's really just like them doing their job to show like we have done the due diligence. So when there is that one design and people are like, why does it cost so much? And you're like, look at all this thinking that went into it.
Right.
Okay.
Can I
Super.
piggyback off of that?
Yeah.
Just so that everyone here online and in the room are on the same page. The committee that Dr. Brand talked about earlier, those 22 members that have been, with us and diligently working through all of these designs and giving their feedback, are the ones that will be voting to make this short list. But all of your feedback is very, very important to help those people make that informed decision. So this Mentimeter platform that we're using is really, really critical, because we'll take that and bring it back to that committee, show them what the community feels, and everyone that has been participating through these visioning sessions, through these community forums, so that they can make their decision for the community. So when we take the large 18 options and we narrow it down to the 5, in 6 months, when we narrow it down to the 1, and we have that one preferred option, it's the one that you all want. It's not the one that the committee decides, well, this is what we want. It's what you all do. So the feedback that you provide through the email address on the website, send your questions in. We'd love to hear them. Anything you want to know. You are more than welcome to come to any of our building committee meetings, and we've now made them hybrid so that it's easier for people to attend. I know it's difficult to sometimes come in person when you have little ones at home, or parents that you're caring for. So, join online. Put in a question in the chat. We'd be happy to answer them, and we'd love to hear all of that feedback. So,
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
you're welcome.
We have, we'll go to a virtual question and then in person. Does the district have the ability to run a projection of potential cost savings in transportation with consolidated runs of K-5 schools? Again, great question. So those are the types of things that in the next phase, I totally do envision, well, maybe not a perfect science, an ability to reasonably forecast everything from how many staff may be in the school to transportation and other variables that, may go from the operation of 3 schools to 2 or to 1. So those are things that, to the degree that we can assemble as part of the story here, the narrative for consideration, we'll certainly do so.
So I'm Christine Prendergast. I am one of the committee members. I just wanted to piggyback what Julie was saying. In terms of pulling in your friends, family, neighbors in the community, I can't express enough how important it is for everybody to get on board and get educated now. This will go for town vote in May of 2025. If for some reason this gets shot down, it will be detrimental to our community. So everybody should really get educated now. It's really important. Our committee would be ever so grateful because it would be a lot of work if we had to start over.
Thanks. Are there any other questions? Sure.
Just out of curiosity, I'm sure that you can't give like a number, but when we talk about the MSBA contribution, you know, obviously you mentioned that there's some things that wouldn't be covered, but like what is like a vague percentage of what could be covered by the grant? Like, you know, would it be like, you know, typically it's around 50% of the projected cost, or, you know, and again, I know it's risky putting a real number out there, but just to kind of give a sense of what the MSBA grant contribution actually looks like.
So we talk about this a lot because the MSBA, when you enter the program, the MSBA does a lot of data and research on your community. And they factor in a whole variety of issues, and they issue you what they refer to as a base reimbursement rate. However, as the process goes on, and right now, let's say, you know, we're at 18 options, and of these 18 options, the costs that you saw, which, let's be all honest in this room, they were pretty scary, right? Everyone's horrified when they see $200 million in costs. But those are ranges, those are square foot costs. That's not accounting for where every outlet is in every room and, you know, where the ceilings are. So that's why the range is so large, is because we're not looking at a room that looks like this. We're just looking at a blob. It's a square. That's it. And so as time goes on and we do our next estimate, that number where it's this wide gets to be this wide. And then the next estimate, it gets even smaller. So as we go along, we're narrowing that down. But in doing so, people ask for certain things. For example, a full-size gym, right? And in a school that would be pre-K to 3, a full-size high school gym, as Jason mentioned, isn't reimbursable. They'll reimburse a portion of it, but the remaining portion will come out of the taxpayer's pocket. So at this time, we can't really tell you that percentage because all of those little things get factored into it. But as Ronnie mentioned earlier, I mean, there's a spreadsheet, and if you ever saw it, it blows your mind. It's about this big, and it's got all these little side things over here, and it's how they calculate the eligible costs. And so I mentioned earlier there's a base reimbursement rate, but once we plug in and we do that estimate, and anybody who's in construction, they've seen an estimate, and it's done by, we call it a CSI format. It's broken out by the roof costs this much, and the site costs this much, and abatement, you know, any of an old building. It's all broken out. You plug that into that spreadsheet, and it tells you what your effective reimbursement rate is. So although the MSBA may say you're here, right here, for your base reimbursement rate, once you plug in all those numbers, you might be here. But you might not. You might have done a really good job of not asking for extra bells and whistles that the MSBA won't reimburse for, so you might be here. So it's unfair to the community for us to give you something right now, although, believe me, I just went through this in my town. I'm just like you. We just combined 3 schools into one. So I feel how, and I lived this myself, so I completely understand. But it's not fair to the community right now to tell you what we can, you know, guesstimate, like, is it 50%, is it 47%, is it 25%? Because people will hang their hat on that number. And in a year from now, when we go to town meeting, people say, wait, hold on. At Community Forum number 3, you said it was going to be 50%, and it's really not. It's 32. So
Julie, can I ask on behalf of everyone, when will we know that effective reimbursement rate? And what phase of this project,
When we do the project scope and budget agreement.
which is approximately, when?
Actually, you
At the-
have the
At the
slide
end of
up right
SD.
At- Can you?
So at the schematic design phase,
Yeah.
before we come to the town vote, we will know what the effective rate is. So that happens, so once we get down to one option and we develop that in greater detail, we will then estimate it. All those numbers go into the spreadsheet, the 3011 is what it's referred to.
Yes.
That Julie was talking about, and pop it all in. We're gonna get some numbers. We have several meetings with MSBA potentially to go back and forth on what we think and defending why we think certain things should be eligible, or not. And then eventually we'll come to a resolution. We'll have a number, and then at that point, it is fair to share that information with the public, because then we can actually say, this is your number for the total project cost, this is the construction cost, this is the effective rate that the MSBA is going to reimburse, and these are the eligible expenses, and then be able to give you a better handle on what the cost is and the cost impact is for the town.
So to give you a rough time frame, it's about a year from now. And about a year from now, we'll know the one project, right? So we'll go from the many to the few to the one. And we're going to be in town meeting in May of 2025. So before that, so about a year from now, we'll have that cost. We'll be able to share that. We'll also be able to give you a tax calculator, and we can put it on our website where you can put in the assessed value of your home, and then you'll know based on what the MSBA's reimbursement rate is, that what your tax impact will be.
And then just to be clear, when we're looking at the ad reno and it says for comparison only for Woburn and North, so that's that like dollar amount you're seeing there is representing if you're just doing like a renovation to that school for those students that are there now, right? And so that's not including any of these ideas of consolidation. So potentially that would be, one of those tickets for a future job for the town, potentially not having the assistance of the MSBA grant, right?
Correct.
Okay.
You would not have MSBA, it would not be part of the MSBA program because that school was not accepted by itself. That's why we have to look at it as a pre-K 3 if you wanted to include Woburn with Wildwood. Or it would have to be pre-K 5, and then you would include North into that grouping.
But if you applied for a new MSBA grant
It would
for
have
that
to be its
thing,
own
but,
separate project. It would
Yeah.
have to get invited back in, yeah. So it would be starting from scratch again.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just want to push on this. We won't know the effective reimbursement rate until basically the decision's already made. I mean, I think that it's really important for the community to have a sense of what this is. And I get the idea that you can't be on the hook for a number, but here is what the town of Acton-Boxborough, which is one of the schools I toured, they gave a range at this phase of about 30 to 45%. Now that was a different year, it was a different time frame, so nobody and I'm not an authority, but this is publicly available information, and their big option was 30 to 45%. Their repair-only option was 1% of reimbursement. That is what I got from publicly available information on the Acton-Boxborough website. And I would encourage this committee to come to the table with a ballpark, 20 to 50%, something so that the average person who doesn't know anything about grants gets a sense that this is not going to be 200 million. It's going to be somewhere between, 20 and 50% of that, or excuse me, 80 to 50 to 80% of that. So I really do want to push on that, and I know it will be important to have it at this earlier phase before we go to the one. And other communities, like I get not being a hook for a number, but a range, a ballpark.
And so one of the things that we talked about was potentially doing some of those 3011 forms on the shortlisted options so that we could kind of get a little bit of a range so that people could understand. So it was something that we, actually, Jason and I were talking about earlier today. To do it on 18 options is really challenging because you don't have enough data. But to do it for the smaller group, once they get a little bit more data, we could probably put something like that together. But I think, Jason, did you have something that you wanted to share?
Yeah, this question comes up in many communities, and so we've prepared a graphic to sort of show, well, that's really terrible.
Yeah. It's a light color, so.
You want to shut the lights off?
We'll see if we can,
I think the lines will come in.
if we can make this better. Just to sort of demonstrate how this works, and then we've got two examples from Doran Whittier work. We don't have anything related to Wilmington for tonight, but we have two examples from other Doran Whittier work to demonstrate sort of how different this gap between the base reimbursement rate and the effective reimbursement rate can be depending on project specifics. So this is a completely hypothetical scenario. We're playing with monopoly money here. So to make the math easy, we're saying, let's suppose this is a project of $100 and a base reimbursement rate of 50%. My Zoom and my, there we go. And there's an asterisk next to that 50%, because as we've all been saying, right, that reimbursement rate only applies to eligible costs. It doesn't apply to absolutely everything. And so the first thing the MSBA does is they establish what costs are eligible, and it's never 100% of what the project really costs. And so in this scenario, let's say that the MSBA has deemed that $60 of the 100 fit in this eligible category. It's not until after they've established what those eligible costs are that they apply the reimbursement rate. So they're applying that rate only to that segment of the project, and therefore the MSBA's maximum grant is calculated on that eligible set of costs. So in this case, 50% of 60 turns out to be $30. And so the remaining amount is the local share. So in this case, $70, not $50. And so that changes the reimbursement rate from a base reimbursement rate of 50% to an effective reimbursement rate of 30%. So that's just sort of a quick example of how this math all really works.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, the math makes sense. I just think that we just need before we decide which option we need, or how the committee can decide which option, they need to have a sense of, it could 30 to 50.
And so here are two concrete examples from communities that Doran Whittier has worked with. This one, the Hatherley Elementary School, they started at a base reimbursement rate of just under 48%. And after it ran through the MSBA machine, right, their effective reimbursement rate dropped roughly 18 points down to just over 30%. In a Gloucester example, it was actually a far greater delta, right? They started at a reimbursement rate of around 65%, and after all of the calculations were completed, it had an effective reimbursement rate of just over 40%. So it can vary wildly from community to community, which is why, you know, design teams are often hesitant to speculate until we know a little bit more about each of the concepts.
Why does the base rate change? Or the base reimbursement rate change?
It's different from one community to the next, right? There's a whole set of formulas that the MSBA uses to determine the local economic conditions in each community. So it's a sliding scale. It can max out at 80% and it can bottom out at 30%. But it's different from one community to the next.
No.
Yes, I'd like to have you talk to us a little bit about debt servicing. Mr. Brand, would you by chance happen to know what the yearly interest is or payment is on this existing school? And the gentleman from Doran Whittier, if you have an example of something that you've recently done as far as interest rate on the bond and the debt servicing, like average per year on something that would be similar in scope to what you're what you're talking about.
I don't know the debt service for the high school. I couldn't comment on that.
Would Mr. Ruggiero know that, the finance director? Would you know what that is?
No, that's all within the town.
But it's on the budget this year, right? That's part of the budget? Okay, you don't, it's okay if you don't know. All right. The reason why I asked that is because I think it's nice to think out of the box once in a while. And I have friends that are actually preschool teachers, and I want to say that they told me that it's about 10 students per teacher. And I have another friend who has taught at MIT. MIT actually has a preschool, and I think Harvard does too, and I think there's a lot of corporations that actually have their own preschool in their corporations. And so thinking outside the box, one of the things that I'd like to explore or have the town and the committee explore is to reach out to some of our industrial and commercial businesses and see if there's any type of incentive for them to pony up some money, some space, and actually maybe get a tax credit so that they actually incorporate a preschool in with their business. Have you looked at anything like that?
We've not looked into anything like that. No, we have not.
Okay.
Right now, the focus is on trying to provide appropriate space here in the district for our families and their children. So we've not looked at anything beyond that.
And as we are participating with the MSBA, that is the program that we're currently in.
Okay, I understand that, but if there's a better way, I think we might want to look at some better ways to do it, especially lessening the financial impact on people. Mr. Brand, I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but every year a certain amount of money goes into what's called free cash. And the reason why that amount of money, it's usually like millions of dollars, goes into free cash is because of a budget on a particular department falling below, the cost of the department falls below the budget. Since you're in charge of the school department, for example, last year, can you tell us what amount of money from the school department went into free cash?
I can't tell you that number, Mr. McDonald, and for tonight's purposes, it really would be appreciative for everyone's time here if we could keep the questions on this project.
Okay, the reason why I brought that up is because we have like $40 million in free cash, and we're talking about schools falling into disrepair. And I believe that you're located in the Roman House, and the last town meeting, we saw pictures of that, the siding, just a mess. And so we're putting all this money into free cash, and reasonable people in town are asking the question, why isn't the money being used to actually fix these buildings and allowing them to fall into disrepair where they actually have to get knocked down? So I don't want to take any more time, but could you give us the answers to those two questions at the next forum, or actually maybe on your website, tell us how much money from last year's budget went into free cash and what the debt servicing is costing on, say, this high school?
Those would be questions that would be more, that would pertain to the town, but I can convey the questions that have been asked here. But it would be something it's outside of the purview of the school department directly, but
Okay.
I certainly will pass along your
Just to
interest.
give you a concern that I have, I've
Mr.
been going
McDonald,
to a
could
lot
we-
of the...
could- Mr. McDonald, could we please, there's
Okay, yeah,
someone
sorry
else
about that.
waiting. Thank you. One last question to Mr. Ragsdale tonight. I take that back. There are, well, we'll do three more questions in the interest of time. Will pre-K and special education spaces be reimbursable?
The short answer to that is yes. Pre-K classrooms are eligible for MSBA reimbursement. And all special education spaces are eligible for reimbursement.
Regarding reimbursement, last virtual question we have, do we know our base reimbursement rate now? And that was a few minutes ago, so I think we've got a clear answer on that, right? We do not know our base reimbursement rate.
We do know our base reimbursement rate.
We do know our base reimbursement.
We do. It is posted on the MSBA's website, so nothing I'm going to say right now is a secret. It is 47.84%. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, that is your base reimbursement rate, and once the calculations are done, your effective reimbursement rate, as Jason showed you on the screen, can change.
Mr. Ragsdale.
David Ragsdale, I'm the school committee representative on the school building committee, and I just wanted to address a little bit of this issue that we've been coming back to about not knowing the effective reimbursement rate until we've already made a decision on the project. So while we won't know the exact number until we've got one project that we can really dive down into the weeds and get all the details on, as we do more of the due diligence and dive into the short list, we will start to get more of an idea of where this lands. So the school committee, the school building committee will not be making a decision completely in a vacuum, because of course, what project we ultimately decide to pursue and put in front of town meeting, an important part of that is what is the cost going to be, which you have to have some idea about what the likely range of reimbursable expenses and effective reimbursement is. So as we go further along in this process, we won't get the actual number, but we will not be in a complete vacuum with no information about that at all. We will know more about what the potential ranges are, and therefore could make adjustments about if something needs to change to try to address the reimbursable cost aspect, or get a sense of kind of what range we're ultimately looking at. We will know more than we know now, so it won't be a completely ignorant decision, even though we won't be able to pin it down until we finally commit to one project.
Thanks, Mr. Ragsdale. On that note, I know it's been a lot of your time. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for the almost 30 folks who are at home tuning in. On behalf of the Wildwood School Building Committee, thanks for your interest in the project. Thanks for your time on this late evening, and have a good holiday weekend. Thank you.